to have a stand for this, but there we go. Improvise, adapt, overcome, right? Isn't that what they say? Isn't that one of the military mottos? It does. It does. I'll be right back and get myself some water.
That's my favorite hangout.
I can't go there.
They do have food. Oh, don't tell my friend.
Somebody's not in the I used to love this. And the guy in that. That was so. Because I could even.
Oh, yes, they're everywhere.
Yeah. You can sit on the trolley car. In the trolley. Trolley car. Yeah, you would like that.
Yes, all kids love this.
My grandson took the trolley car. We ate.
I have to go there. And we have to get there. We have to leave the house. You have to be there at 5 and then you have to wait. These two are.
These two that
Your
come
wife and Then.
Okay. So Stevie makes sense.
Well, we don't know.
So this is 8.
You're
So
coming.
what's your name?
You're coming.
That's great.
We'll try to get
This
it.
will be a fun time.
I hope so. Now, don't you dare bring any gifts. I don't want anybody to bring gifts. Don't need anything. I just need friends.
And it's a fun place.
Hey, that's all I need. Unfortunately, well, I don't like that celebration, but I do like
I like eating. Yes, I do.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. O most merciful and mighty God, your Son, Jesus Christ, was born of the Blessed Virgin Mary to bring us salvation and to establish your kingdom on earth. Grant that Michael and all your angels may defend your people against Satan and every evil foe. And at the last, may we come to that heavenly country where with your saints that we may forever sing your praise. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And just so you know, that prayer came from our official Episcopal Book of Occasional Services, Service for All Hallows Eve. Yes, we have a Halloween service in our BOS. As we get closer to All Hallowtide, which was the old term for All Saints Eve, All Halloween, All Saints Day, and All Souls Day, it was known as All Hallowtide. I'll have some little devotional guides out for people in the parish hall. And we'll talk more about the Book of Occasional Services later because it talks about Episcopal exorcism in here.
Oh, we love that. Good
All right, so welcome to the Halloween special. This is a series of topics I'm really fascinated by. I have a lot of information. This is a small part of the books I have on demonology. I have more at home. I've got other stuff on all sorts of weird things. So I really like talking about this. There's also a lot more information that just isn't going to make the cut in any of this. But tonight we're going to talk about demons and exorcism. Next Sunday, ghosts, and the Sunday after that, magic and witchcraft, and kind of talk about like Christianity and paganism, where we kind of have similarities, where we're in conflict, and like talking about that whole sort of issue as well. So you'll not want to miss any of those. I had this clipped in. There we go. Yep. So today, yes, we'll talk about Christian demonology. I love this image of Saint Mary punching Satan in the face. So there you go. If you need a new version of a Hail Mary, there's one for you. I just really love that medieval image there. So demons appear in a lot of art, right? This is part of our Christian heritage and tradition. In fact, as we will see, it is very distinctly Christian. Demons appear more prominently in the New Testament and the Gospels than they do in the Old Testament. We'll talk a little bit about that, but it's kind of sometimes of a shock to people that if we're going to talk about demons and hell, that is a New Testament. That is really a New Testament concept, way more than it is an Old Testament one. All right, but a few foundations here and presuppositions for myself. I am, of course, coming from this from a Christian perspective, a particularly Episcopalian perspective in the way we do theology. So we've got a live stream there. If anyone's joining us online, that's my perspective I'm coming from. Just you'll have to translate into, obviously, into your own. One of my presuppositions here is spiritual reality is real, but not all of it is good. I might tell a story again on ghosts, but back in Texas, I was invited to speak at a paranormal conference, actually. Asked to talk on Christian demonology at this paranormal conference. Really fascinating. Got to interact with all sorts of interesting people. The only people that gave me a side eye was the alien conspiracy guy. I think he thought I was in on it because he had these charts that had like Father, Son, and Spirit from planet Xenu or something. So I think he must have thought I was in on it. Everybody else was really nice and really friendly. It was really a great way to connect, to be kind of a presence actually for Jesus in a very different environment. And I was asked about Ouija boards by a obviously disapproving parent in front of Ouija board manufacturers in public there. And I kind of talked about this more. Spirituality is real, but hey, not all of it is good, all right? And we'll talk about this more at the end too, because I think this is an important lesson in our own Christian lives. We can actually learn from studying demonology actually impacts the way we think about salvation. And if that sounds weird, just keep a note in that hat. Revelation and reason, put them together. Grace perfects nature, it doesn't destroy it, as St. Thomas Aquinas said. Therefore, we can take insights and knowledge, certainly from science in the modern world, and they are true and real. We also believe in revelation, and we work and the two of them together in balance. It's a very Episcopalian thing. I would argue it's a very Thomas Aquinas thing if you actually do what he was trying to do, and you don't just follow what he said slavishly. He really was trying to connect the two together. The Bible also doesn't tell us everything, okay? A lot of speculation is involved in any of this. In fact, one of the things we're going to go through is how some of our assumptions of what demons and Satan might be or might be like might have more in might really be a matter of like culture and layers of Christian tradition or interpretation than they are really kind of what the Bible is actually saying. So there's going to be a lot of speculation involved in a lot of things, and one of the things on this is I'm going to try to point out, kind of like I did with the angels class, the difference between Bible and tradition, and when something is just like lore and legend. Okay, I'll try to distinguish these things fairly carefully. So what are we talking about here? If you remember the angels class, you remember this chart. This is a great chart. We are talking about something we might call the missing middle. None of these classes is going to make any sense unless you think about the missing middle. In the ancient world, in the world of the Bible, in a lot of traditional societies, their world consists of a higher, a middle, and an earthly reality of some sort, regardless of the religion. And there's a lot of, different religions are going to put things in different spots and have fuzzier lines. But in general, they have some idea of God or the gods or karma or fate or ultimate cosmic forces somewhere on the top, okay? On the bottom, of course, you have humans and social order, our natural world, animals and plants. And in most traditional societies, in the world of the Bible, in the medieval world as well, these often are relational. Everything is kind of a relational concept. And between the two, you had a spectrum of the middle world, which involved angels, lesser spirits, elementals, fae folk, demigods, ancestors, saints, magic, all that stuff, all right, was considered the middle. Regardless, there were certainly different religions and different cultures have different things in these boxes, but in general, they had something in all the boxes, right? Well, the Enlightenment changed a little bit, all right? So we live in a post-Enlightenment world, for better or worse, one way or the other, and we tend to interpret reality, all right? All of us are wearing glasses, okay? All of us are viewing the world through a set of assumptions and biases that we assume, of course, is the right way of doing it, all right? And this is one of them. We are influenced by the post-Enlightenment worldview. Maybe you want to argue that's true, fair enough, but for the purposes of this, what's going on when we talk about angels, we talking about demons now, we talk about ghosts, witchcraft, magic, all this stuff essentially got eliminated. We just took it out, right? The Enlightenment kind of just hit delete and was done with it. On the top, you have a God, the divine, a spiritual realities, and often it's like a vague God that may or may not be involved in the world, some form of deism, for instance. And it's part of religion, and religion is private. And of course, on the bottom, you have science, and science is public, and this is humanities and animals and all the stuff here, except instead of it being relational, it's mechanical concepts that can be taken apart. This is the way we tend to interact with the world. That's not the way that medievals and the world of the Bible, many traditional societies in the world today, that's not the way they interact with the world or view it. I'm sorry. That's not the way they view the world, all right? So we have the missing middle. And what we're talking about is that get really close to that.
Sorry.
Uh-oh. I think we're okay. That was just a lid.
Piece fell out, but I guess
Yeah,
it
that
didn't
was just
break.
a
I'm
lid.
sorry.
You're right. You're right. That was just a lid.
You can get it back up.
Yeah. Let's see. There we go. There's that. Get that a little bit. There we are. And there we are. Okay. And there we go. Right back at it. Voila. Oh. Okay. There we are. I think we can see down there. I realize I might not be able to see very. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So that's what we're talking about is this whole this middle here. No? Come on. Here we go. All right. Can Episcopalians talk about this stuff at all? This tends not to be something Episcopalians want to talk about, right? Our tradition tends to pride itself on being a little bit more enlightened, perhaps, all right? And, you know, this isn't for us. But it's in our prayer book. We saw our baptism today. What's part of our baptismal rite? Do you renounce Satan and all the spiritual forces of wickedness that rebel against God? In our compline service, we have a quotation from 1 Peter 5:8 about your adversary, the devil. The Book of Occasional Services, where this came from, has that prayer for All Hallows Eve. It also has a what would be called a minor exorcism in the house blessing, and it has a page in here concerning exorcism in our Book of Occasional Services. There are dioceses that have exorcists. This diocese at least used to, because I met the guy years ago. And the Church of England, every diocese has a ministry of deliverance. So it is very much part of our tradition. I'll have some books I'll talk about later to delve into that a little bit more. Another thing, just as we get started in this, is to talk about evil overall. Remember that evil is a privation or an absence of the good. So evil is to darkness, all right, as light. So a good is to evil as light is to darkness. When you want to make a room dark, you take the light away. You remove something. You don't bring dark into it, all right? Evil is a corruption of something else, which is good. So insofar as Satan and the demons, the demonic does not have like a pure existence. There's no such thing as pure evil. That actually, even from a very traditional medieval idea, that's not even a possible thing to say. Because if something exists, it already has some goodness, because existence is itself good. It has to be a corruption of something which is good. That's very important. It gets lost in a lot of modern Christian kind of ideas, but it is very traditional, actually, that evil is a privation of the good or an absence of it. We talk about in our prayer book, right, in our baptism, we renounce the devil, we renounce the powers of the world, renounce our own sinful flesh. All those three work together. So when we're talking about the devil, it is certainly true. We cannot talk about, well, the devil made me do it, right? This isn't everything I can blame on the devil. All three work together. And also remember, when the Bible talks about flesh, it doesn't mean the physical body. God loves the physical body. Romans 8:23, all creation groans awaiting the redemption of our bodies, not the redemption of our souls. The Bible doesn't say redemption of the soul, it says redemption of the body. The flesh is the corrupted part of human nature. It doesn't mean physical stuff. God loves this stuff. God became incarnate in this stuff, all right? So that's sort of the basics for evil. So, that was just a preliminary. Let's talk about demons, all right? Demons in the Old Testament. One thing we have to remember is the word demon is a Greek word that only appears in the New Testament, all right? Demonion, we'll get to what that means, is a Greek word. The Hebrew does not have a singular word that means demon, all right? Instead, there are lots of different words that either A, are sometimes translated as demon, or are something else that are often seen or interpreted as a demonic entity. So Shadim and Serim are sometimes translated demon. Azazel, maybe demonic, that's a little weird. We'll get to that. Unclean spirit is mentioned once. And then Lilith, you may have heard of Lilith. Lilith gets batted around in a lot of popular ideas, maybe and only once. But we'll talk about all of those in turn. Shadim. All right, Shadim appears only twice. Okay, appears in Deuteronomy and in Psalms. And I give you this quote here from Deuteronomy. They sacrifice to demons. Okay, the English translation is demons. The Hebrew is Shadim, not God, to deities they had never known, to new ones recently arrived, whom your ancestors had not seen. It's used the same way in Psalm 106:37. These are the only two times this word appears. In the Greek translation of the Old Testament, known as the Septuagint, uses the Greek word demonion in both of these places. English translations use demon, but all it says is Shadim. All right. Now, we don't actually know what the Shadim were. We don't really know what these Bible verses are referring to. It seems to be, obviously, something, some kind of spiritual entity, some kind of idea, some kind of belief that was kind of like a false god, or a spirit they shouldn't sacrifice to, or something along those lines. Now, I want you to notice, though, interestingly, this Bible verse doesn't say they exist, actually, does it? It just says don't sacrifice to these things, right? If I say, you know what, you shouldn't sacrifice to Zeus, right? I am not making a comment on whether Zeus exists or not. Maybe I'm also claiming Zeus doesn't exist. Maybe Zeus does exist and you just shouldn't sacrifice to him. That's not the point. This Bible verse doesn't actually say anything about what the Shadim are, whether they exist. All it says is Israel is not to sacrifice to these things. Now, what are these things? It's possible that they were the word that the culture surrounding Israel used for some kind of religious lesser spirit, some kind of, something. Maybe it operated like the Greek nymphs, okay? A nature spirit, a spirit of the desert. But it was something that Israel knew. They would have known what a Shadim is, right? All right? It existed in the culture of the time. And God just says, hey, don't offer sacrifices to them. Maybe the word meant foreign gods. I mean, there is this emphasis here. New ones recently arrived, and your ancestors had not feared. Maybe it was a generic word for foreign gods. And it was just referring to, Asherah or Baal or something like that. It's hard to really tell. All right? And I didn't see in anything I've read, any studies in the ancient Near East that have found anything. That doesn't mean they haven't found something. Maybe someday we'll dig something up from the Hittites or the Canaanites that'll have the word Shadim in it, and we'll know a little bit more. But that's all we got, and that's it on the Shadim. Another word that sounds very similar to that is Serim here, and I might be mispronouncing that a little bit. It's been a long time since I took Hebrew. It's usually translated as goat. In Leviticus 16, the word just means goat. It can also mean hairy. So Esau, in Genesis 27:11, is referred to as a Serim, hairy. Right? It just means hairy. That's it. However, there are a few places, and I printed off the guides and left it all. After this, I'll go run to my office, and I have handouts with some of this information on there. I'll give that to you. Where I printed some of these verses out. But a few times it's used just as some word, hairy ones, or hairy things. That's cutting it in. A lot of English translations translate that as goat demons. You might see that in a translation here or there. It only appears a few times, a couple of times in Isaiah, Leviticus, and 2 Chronicles. And the two places in Isaiah, it seems to be associated with deserted places. I think I did actually give, yes, I did print off two of these. So check this out. This word here appears, for instance, in Isaiah 13, 20 to 21. And it just means hairy ones, all right? So it's a judgment passage, okay? God is giving judgment on this group through the prophet Isaiah, and talks about how this place will never be inhabited or lived in for all generations. Arabs will not pitch their tents there. Shepherds will not make their flocks lie down there, but wild animals will lie down there. And its houses will be full of howling creatures. Ostriches will live, and their goat demons will dance. There are some old translations translated this as satyrs for this reason, actually. Now, again, the Old Testament text just uses this Hebrew word that means hairy ones. When we get to Revelation, though, Revelation has something very similar about Babylon. Fallen is Babylon the Great, become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt of every foul spirit, a haunt of every foul bird, a haunt of every foul and hateful beast. It's a very similar kind of mirror image. Several of these verses, going back to these two in Isaiah, both have this idea that these hairy ones will inhabit places that have been sort of deserted, particularly places that have been judged. And in Leviticus 17:7 and 2 Chronicles 11:15, they appear to be something that could be falsely worshipped, some kind of entity. That's why people think it's more than just a goat, because this could be just like a goat, and their ostriches will live, and their goat demons, goats will dance. Maybe it's just, it's grown up so much, there's grass, the goats have moved in. It could just be referring to a wild animal. But then you have those two other verses in Leviticus and 2 Chronicles that seem to be a little bit more. So, goat demons often the translation, but we're not entirely sure what's going on in the text. And then there's this interesting little mirror with Revelation here. Another one, Leviticus 17:7. So that they may no longer offer their sacrifices for Sarim, for goat demons, to whom they prostitute themselves. This shall be a statute forever to them throughout the generations. This is why this is why the NRSV translates it as goat demons. A lot of scholars think there's some kind of demonic idea, or some kind of false god, or something behind this. Now notice, goat demons is still interpreted, right? The Hebrew word doesn't say that. It's just a Hebrew word, all right? This could just be some type of false spirit. This could be some kind of belief in some kind of nature spirit. Maybe it's a belief in some kind of desert spirit, kind of like, the Shadim were, and they're not supposed to sacrifice themselves to it. And they use the word hairy to describe it. Hairy ones. They offer their sacrifices for hairy ones. That's actually really mostly what the text says. But based on a couple of these references, it appears to be some kind of spirit that Israel's not supposed to be involved in. All right. Now notice at this point, we have none of these verses have said these things are fallen angels, or these things are like even evil per se. It's just said Israel's not supposed to worship them, and they might inhabit waterless places. Notice that's all so far the text has said. Yes?
I just have to interject.
Yes.
Because I did a whole study on this with theater arts. And during the Dionysius festival, the Greek wine festival, it was a certain time of the year where they had one play after another.
Yeah.
One of the things that some of the men did would be dress up in goat fur,
Interesting.
horns,
All right.
and hairy things around them, and they would dance wildly. I mean, it was like chaos through the streets, and then everybody would follow them down into the. It was an everyday occurrence.
There could be something like that going on here in ancient Israel. I mean, it's a different part of the world with a different time period, but it doesn't mean there's not a connection historically.
I'm just telling you.
That's interesting. I'm going to look into that. Yeah, I'll look into that because that's kind of interesting. Yeah. Just give you some options here and other places appears. Okay, so the next word we're going to talk about Azazel. Scholars don't know what this is referring to. This is another one. Scholars are not sure. I'm going to say that a lot during all of this. Scholars are not sure. But in Leviticus 16, which is the Day of Atonement ritual, right, where the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies with blood and purifies the temple, that, Yom Kippur, right, that's the Hebrew name for it. Leviticus 16 is a description of what they're supposed to do. And as part of this, there are 2 goats that are brought. And one of them is to be given to the Lord, and the other one is to be sent into the desert, right? The goat on which the lot fell for Azazel. That's what the Hebrew says. It's just a word. We're not sure what it means. And most translations will capitalize it like it's a person of some sort, okay? Shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement over it, that it may be sent away into the wilderness to Azazel. Again, Leviticus 16:28, the one who sets the goat free for Azazel shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward may come to the camp. There appears to be some kind of goat sent away. Now, old translations would actually translate this as a scapegoat. That's actually where we get the word scapegoat from, is this passage. Modern translations, NRSV, will translate it Azazel because that's just a transliteration of the Hebrew, and it seems to be a proper name, and we don't know what it means. And it looks like, if you were just read this, it looks like there is some entity in the desert named Azazel, and Israel is supposed to send the goat out to it. Now, of course, God also says, don't sacrifice to the gods of the desert and the wilderness, and it sure looks like this is offering a goat sacrifice to something in the desert. So, we're not entirely sure what is going on here. Certainly, that's kind of it, right? Like we're just not sure where this goes. This is where speculation starts to come in. Other documents much later will present this as some kind of demonic entity, but all the Leviticus says is send it out into Azazel. There we are. That's kind of it on Azazel. Unclean spirit is used only in the Old Testament once, Zechariah 13:2, and it's in the connection to prophets. This is a good side note, actually, the concept of uncleanliness. Remember that in the Bible, unclean doesn't mean the same thing as sinful. Cleanliness is a ritual category. Sin is a moral category. An unclean spirit is one that is ritually unclean. It bleeds into the idea of being bad, but there are plenty of things that can make a person unclean in the law, in Leviticus. That word doesn't mean it was necessarily a mortal sin. All right, we have lots of issues of blood, for instance, menstruation. The woman was considered unclean for a period of time. It doesn't mean that she was in sin for menstruating. All right, it was a concept of ritual uncleanliness that was going on. Cleanliness is a whole other complicated topic I won't talk about, but it appears in this context of a prophet. So it could just be Zechariah is referring to the prophecy as being bad. Like, this is a euphemism for having, this prophet isn't speaking for God. So they essentially are ritually unclean in their spirit. That could be kind of going on, because it only appears here. Now, in the New Testament, unclean spirits will appear a lot. They have their own personality, and Jesus cast them out of people. But in the Old Testament, this is it. Right? Lilith. Lilith appears, the word Lilith appears once in Isaiah 34:14. Also, with the word goat demons, notice that there, it's the same passage. There's this idea of an area that has been under judgment, and it is no longer has human civilization in it, and so there are the goat demons, and the Hebrew word is Lilith. Some translations will translate that night owl, because the origin of that word, the root of it, seems to be night. So it's like a night creature of some sort. However, most, like RSV says night hag, NASB's night monster, NIV says night creature, and the NET says nocturnal animals. They take it in a non-supernatural, non-spiritual category, but most others translate it something like that, or the NRSV just says Lilith. The reason that it's usually translated Lilith, and a lot of scholars think that it probably is referencing, this is more clearly referencing a demonic entity in the Old Testament than anything else, is because Lilith is very close, the Hebrew word is very close to an Akkadian word. So the Akkadians were a cultural group that were essentially kind of culturally in the same ancient Near Eastern pot as Israel, all right? And they weren't the only ones that had a word for a type of night demon. Usually it was a female demoness in ancient Acadia. There are exorcism incantation bowls that were designed in the ancient Near East, or nations around Israel, that were designed to remove her, cast her out. In later Jewish ideas, she becomes the first wife of Adam, who the story is in the legend that Lilith wanted to be seen as an equal during their intimate times, and Adam refused, and so she fled, and God sent 3 angels after her, and Lilith went to find the king of demons, Asmodeus, and they had a bunch of babies, and she threatened to kill all the children, but the 3 angels they worked it out, I guess, and there were amulets in the Middle Ages with the 3 angels' names on it to put on the child to prevent them from being killed by one of Lilith's children. That was the legend that developed. She's got a lot of other legends that develop around her. None of that is in here. All of that is lore, legend type things. But unlike some of the other words like Azazel or even Shadim, but due to this word's similarity to other words used by the Akkadians and all, to reference what we know was a demoness in those religions, this looks very similar. Now, having said that, admittedly, this doesn't mean that there isn't actually a Lilith, okay? This is kind of a threat of judgment, right? I'm going to destroy your city so bad, there'll be nothing there but my hyenas, goat demons, and there'll even be that night demoness there. So if I were fighting a Viking, right, and I wanted to threaten the Viking, and I might say, I'm going to send you to Valhalla. That doesn't necessarily mean I believe in Valhalla, but that is something that they will understand, right? They know what that means. Maybe it's possible that in some of these cases like this, that could be what's going on. It could just be a general judgment. God is using these cultural ideas and entities and saying, I'm going to wipe out your city so bad, the only thing left are going to be hairy goat demons and Lilith, and that'll be it. It's going to be that bad. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Bible is endorsing a Lilith creature, but maybe it is. There we go. I've gone a little fast so far, I feel like. It's a bit of an information dump, isn't it? So I'm going to take a slight little time. Questions or comments or thoughts so far? Okay, all right, cool. Let's talk about Satan then. Hey, let's talk about Satan. You might think, okay, fine. All those other ideas, yeah, they're a little vague, hairy ones, maybe spirits, we don't know what to do with Lilith. But surely Satan is in the Old Testament. Surely he's prominent. Sort of. All right, so the word Satan, Satan, is Hebrew for adversary. And it has a generic usage. Just like the word angel. Remember the word angel? Greek word angelos, Hebrew word malak, malakim, means messenger. And it can refer to human messengers, or in some cases refers to some kind of spirit from God giving a message. All right? Well, the Hebrew word Satan is the same thing. It's also used for people. People can be adversaries. All right? 1 Kings and Esther. And in one place, the angel of the Lord is referred to as a Satan to Balaam in Numbers 22, 35. Now, obviously, the angel of the Lord is not the king of demons, right? That's not what's going on here. This is a usual word for adversary. So there are a couple of places, like Job and Zechariah, where there's a definite article before it. It's Hasatan, the Satan, all right? And because it has a definite article, many scholars think that it might be referencing a legal function. In other words, someone in the ancient Near Eastern legal context that was known as an adversary in legal, in legal proceedings. Maybe like saying the prosecutor or something along those lines, okay? So it's actually unclear if Job and Zechariah are referring to a entity we might think of as a fallen angel who rules demons, or is referring to someone who, in Job, it's among the angels, right? God holds court, and this adversary comes up to say, so you consider Job. Maybe this is referencing what the New Testament will call Satan, or maybe it's just a legal function. And this is where we have to be very careful with another idea. This sort of segues into this phrase Judeo-Christian. Right? You might hear a lot of people say Judeo-Christian. Certainly, Christianity and Judaism share close family ties, right? The early apostles were Jewish. Jesus was Jewish, absolutely. But we have had 2,000 years of not being the same. One of the things I got interested in over the pandemic was reading up a little bit. I dipped my toe at most into Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, and kind of some of the Jewish theology. And the more I learned about modern day Judaism, in some ways, the more differences I started to see. That we actually do have a lot of differences, all right? And one of the big differences between Christians, so I'm kind of warning Christians, right? Don't just assume that Jews are Christians without the New Testament, okay? Judaism is not just Christianity without the New Testament. That is not accurate to their beliefs. They've had philosophical and theological developments since then, since we split off, and they have their own religion in their own right, and it is different. So I've started to back away from using the phrase Judeo-Christian because I'm not sure it means anything. Judaism is a religion, Christianity is a religion. We share some commonalities, absolutely, but we have some differences. And one of them is when it comes to Satan. The concept of Satan is a much bigger deal within Christianity than it is in Judaism, because this is all they have. They have some couple passages in Ezekiel and Isaiah, we'll talk about those, but they don't have much. Satan is a major player in the Gospels, and therefore in Christianity. He's not a major player in the Old Testament. He's almost non-existent. All right? So that's something we have to deal with. In terms of things, but it's something we need to keep in mind. Well, what about Isaiah? Because you've heard Satan is called the morning star, Lucifer, right? Where does that come from? It comes from Isaiah 14, and we've got another similar context in Ezekiel 28. And they're the ones most commonly cited in terms of Satan in the Old Testament, because they talk about being an anointed cherub in the garden. You have said, I will sin to the Most High, but you will fall like any prince, right? There's this whole judgment passage most of us are familiar with, where this person, this being, this whatever, that the prophet Isaiah is talking to. The prophet Isaiah says, you have said, I will sin to the Most High, you son of the dawn. That's where we get the word Lucifer from, son of the dawn. Possibly it was a reference to the star Venus, by the way. So Lucifer might have just been a reference to Venus, because that was the first star in the morning. So there we are. And Ezekiel's kind of the same similar idea. You were anointed cherub in the garden. And so early Christians took those ideas and said, this looks like Satan, a cherub in the garden. You will ascend to the Most High. And that's where that interpretation came from. That is a traditional Christian interpretation of these passages. However, if you look at the passages in context, that's actually debatable, because both Isaiah and Ezekiel are talking about a human being. In Isaiah, it's, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. And again in Ezekiel, you mortal, rise a lamentation over the king of Tyre. So one of the things about kings in the ancient Near East is they had, well, I'd say overinflated egos is probably an understatement. I'm going to be teaching on Esther coming up, right? And I'm rereading it, and wow, the king, the Xerxes or Ashurius, depending on your translation, he is a piece of work. Really bad, actually. A lot of ancient Near Eastern kings considered themselves to be divine. The Egyptian pharaoh was the son of Ra, all right? Alexander the Great, when he his dad was obviously Philip of Macedon, but after he becomes a conqueror and he gets down to the Middle East, he, lo and behold, finds an oracle who happens to declare that he is truly the son of Zeus. All right? These kings loved glorifying themselves, being like the gods. So it's possible that Ezekiel and Isaiah are just taunting. We're speaking to a mortal king. And again, like they're fighting a Viking. I said, I'm going to send you to Valhalla. Odin is going to pick your bones. I don't have to believe in Odin or Valhalla. I'm threatening them. They could just be, oh yes, you who call yourself the glorious morning star, a cherubim itself, you're going to be destroyed by God if you don't shape up. Right? Like that could be what's going on in these passages. This is a taunting, sarcastic kind of. I think that sometimes we miss that. There's sarcasm in the Bible. And I think sometimes we miss things because we just assume the Bible doesn't have sarcasm. Maybe we think sarcasm is bad or immoral. But the Bible has plenty of sarcasm in it. And when you get to the prophets, it can be very, very biting. There are a couple of parts, there's at least one verse in Isaiah that I probably could not quote in polite company. It's actually that graphic in its taunting of a human king. You can probably look at it later or ask me about it later. So I think there's a lot of stuff going in the Bible. There's not necessarily a spiritual entity here. There's no real indication in the text that it is referring to some kind of king of demons. So all this is probably sounding pretty disappointing at this part. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be fair to the text. One of the things I said is I want to call through the traditional layers, through the speculation, to what the Bible actually says and does not say, and be very honest with the text. That's what I'm trying to do, is be honest with the text. It doesn't mean there's no demonic. It's just demonic starts to pop up a little bit later. Okay. So this little bit later starts to happen in the Apocrypha. So the Apocrypha are those books. They were the Greek part of the Old Testament. They were books that the Roman Catholic Church considers them, and the Eastern Orthodox consider them part of the Old Testament. We, in our tradition, kind of take a middle road. 39 Articles says that they are useful for teaching and moral instruction in Christian life, but not for doctrine. And most of your other Christian groups, your Presbyterian, Baptist, Bible Church, will just not put them in the Bible at all. They're not considered canonical, period. They were very important and influential in the early church. There were Christians who considered the Apocrypha canonical in the early church. There was some debate here and there over it, but they were definitely influential. One of them was the Book of Tobit. Book of Tobit's got a great story. Also demons are mentioned similar to the Old Testament. Kind of this false gods idea twice in Baruch. Otherwise, the Book of Tobit, where you have this demon Asmodeus who has, I don't know, have you read the Book of Tobit recently? You remember the story? Okay, you should really read the Book of Tobit. It's a lot of fun. It's where we get the angel Raphael from. And speaking of that, one of the notes on that for why the Book of Tobit was considered canonical scripture for the early period of time is that in the 8th century, when Pope Zachary holds a council to condemn the veneration of all angels not mentioned in the Bible, all right, because there was a guy in Egypt, Adalbert, who claimed to have powers given to him by angels. So Pope Zachary decreed that only angels in the Bible could be venerated. Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael were among them. They considered that to be part of Scripture in the 700s AD. So pretty early on here. But has a lot of demonology in it. Asmodeus had infested this woman, and every time she got married, her groom would die on their wedding night. And so essentially what happens is the angel Raphael tells Tobias, hey, I've got this. I can help you with this. If you take this fish and you throw its liver and in with some frankincense and some burning coals, it'll drive Asmodeus out. And in the story, Asmodeus is driven out and Raphael goes and binds him in Egypt. That's the story. It's a lot of fun. I like it. You should read it sometime. We can do a play out of that. We can do a play of it. I'll play Asmodeus. I will play Asmodeus. So it appears there. Otherwise, not really anywhere else. But we do start getting some development. The Apocrypha are all written later. They're written after all of our definite Old Testament books. And then from the Apocrypha, we get to something called the Pseudepigrapha. Pseudepigrapha means, it literally means fake writings. What it is, they're a group of writings that are generally attributed to someone else to give them authority. So one of them is the Testament of Solomon. It was not written by Solomon, but it's called the Testament of Solomon to make it feel more authoritative. And it's in this period between the Old Testament and the Gospels that demonology just flourishes. This is where it all comes from, all right? You start having the book of Enoch, which has speculations on Genesis 6, and talks about how the angels fell, and how they were bound in Tartarus or bound in Gehenna. It has the Testament of Solomon, Testament of Solomon, which has this intricate demonology. Basically, in the Testament of Solomon, Solomon binds Asmodeus, the king of demons, and forces all the other demons to come to him, and each one is forced to tell Solomon how they are to be defeated. And it's like, I am susceptible to the angel Uriel, and if you burn the herb chamomile, or I'm making this up, I don't remember the details. I've got a copy I can give you of the Pseudepigrapha, but it comes in 2 volumes. And I'm weak under the star of Mars, but if you try to fight me under Venus, I am strong. It's that kind of stuff. It's a very intricate kind of demonology. One of the Jewish legends that develops is that Solomon used, this is how he built the temple. It was like built with, magic, essentially. It's a wild kind of legend. We're going to circle back to the Testament of Solomon, by the way, because this whole binding demons thing is the origin for an entire magical tradition called Solomonic magic, which is all about binding demons and getting them to do what you want. And it's a whole thing in the Middle Ages. Christians start doing this kind of thing. We'll talk more about that on the 3rd series. Various names for Satan start to develop before the New Testament in the Pseudepigrapha. So you have Mastema and Samael and Melchiah and Beliar or Belial, which is actually picked up by Paul later. It's using that word doesn't appear in the Old Testament, but it does in the Pseudepigrapha, and it is used by Paul later. So then we get to the New Testament. And now demons become a lot more important, particularly in the Gospels. But one thing to note is that the Greek word daemonion just meant lesser spirit. It's sometimes used by classical poets, kind of like a muse kind of idea. Sometimes it's used for shades of the dead. Sometimes it just means some kind of generic lesser spirit. It was just a Greek word, and it could mean anything. In fact, I think I'll mention this later, but there's one place in the New Testament where daemonion is being used by pagans talking in the book of Acts, but it's used in a neutral way. It doesn't mean like an evil spirit to them. It's just a generic word, all right? However, it is the word used in the Septuagint. LXX is the shortened version for the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. To translate those various Hebrew words we talked about, like shadim, right? There's where some of those words pop in. It's used a few other places too, for like idols, I believe, but usually definitely for that. And so this word then gets used a lot in the New Testament, particularly in the Gospels. In fact, Jesus is known for being an exorcist as much as or more than a teacher. So you think of who Jesus was, you think, oh, he was a spiritual guy, he was a teacher, he was, taught us moral values. He was an exorcist. Read the Gospel of Mark in particular. He encounters demons all the time. In fact, Christians, I'll talk about this a little bit more, but Christians were known for being exorcists early on. That was one of the things that made us famous early on, was we could cast out all these demons more than anything else. So this becomes very prominent in the New Testament and in Christianity. Oh yeah, here is the neutral word for this. So we've got the apostles going around. I don't remember at this point, Acts 17. I think that's Paul at this point. And some Epicurean Stoic philosophers, right? So these were philosophical systems that existed in ancient Greece. We're debating with them. Some said, what does this babbler want to say? Others said he seems to be a promoter of foreign divinities. That's the way it's translated. The Greek is xenon daemonion. Xenon, foreign, okay, and demonion, demon. Foreign demons, or foreign deities. Because again, for the Stoics and Epicureans, a demonion was just a lesser spirit, or some kind of thing. It didn't necessarily mean anything evil, okay? So there is an indicator that it had a broader meaning in the cultural context. However, throughout the New Testament, it definitely takes on an evil flavor entirely. So they're commonly associated with wilderness areas, the temptation of Jesus. And there's where we start to see Satan become an entity, right? In the Old Testament, there's this generic idea, maybe it's a legal functionary, maybe, it's something else. But in the Gospels, Satan becomes a thing. Remember, he was a thing in the pseudepigraphon, right? So, which, by the way, that isn't me saying that none of this is true. I just want to be honest with the data on the ground, okay? This is what we have. We can believe in progressive revelation, that we know people knew a little bit at one point, and then God reveals more. I think that's perfectly fine. That's my general approach to it. But I do think we have to be honest with the fact that Satan is basically unknown in the Old Testament, becomes more important in between the Old and New. And in the New Testament, we have him tempting Jesus in the wilderness. All right. We also have other ideas. Jesus' warning in Matthew is all about what an evil spirit goes out from a person. It goes into waterless places, Jesus says. And then we have Revelation 18:2, we already talked about. So there seems to be this association with wilderness, uninhabited areas, and then the demonic, at least in the Gospels. But obviously, as we all know, in the New Testament, they appear possessing people, sometimes leading to self-destruction, like the Gerasene demoniac. That seems to be the main kind of thing we actually see them doing in the Gospels, is causing harm. That's really the deal. It's harm. These are entities, or some kind of spiritual thing causing harm that Jesus then casts out. And this is also something. This is kind of an interesting highlight here with how Jesus does exorcism. And this is actually important in understanding what the Gospels are trying to say about who Jesus is. Okay? Because at one point, all right, we got lots of examples in Mark. I'll give you one where Jesus cast out some more demons, and they were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." Now, we might, in our time, read this, and we read, with authority, because Jesus was king, I guess. And that's true. But there's something else kind of going on here with this idea of authority. Because it appears mostly when Jesus does exorcisms. People say, wow, he teaches with authority. This doesn't mean he teaches with authority. The Testament of Solomon, remember I talked about. Remember how you cast out demons in it? Well, you have to know the right herb. You have to know the right time of the day. They might be weak. You might need to call on the right angel. Exorcistic rites at the time usually involved also calling on a slew of different gods, or using the name of God. You might say, like, in the name of, Yahweh, in the name of Elohim, in the name of El, in the name of Tusha. You might make up a word. Some of them did. Some of them they made up these other words in there. They were like magic power words. We'll talk more about that when we talk about magic. I don't think that was a real one, but I will bring in copies of actual magical text from the time period, so you can see what magic actually looked like, because that's important when the Bible talks about magic, and when you want to say, well, that's magic, we better have some idea of what we mean by that word. And so I'm gonna bring some actual text on that third one. But Jesus doesn't do any of this. He doesn't call on a higher power, right? He doesn't use a complicated ritual. He doesn't use the right incense and the herb at the right time. He says you get out of it, and they do it. Every other exorcist had to call on a higher power. Jesus doesn't, because in the Gospel of Mark, he is the highest power. That's the whole point of the Gospel of Mark. This is actually a declaration of Jesus' divinity. We just don't read it that way because we don't know what ancient exorcism looked like. So we think, he was an authoritative teacher. No, he had God's power because he didn't need to call on a higher power, and even the demons obeyed him. He didn't need anything fancy with him. That's what's going on. Jesus is the most powerful exorcist to walk around because he is God doing exorcism. That's what Mark is actually getting at. Little cultural context there, since we don't often see that in there. Demon is also used in the New Testament for powers which should not be worshipped, or as origins of deception. I've given you a couple of references there as well. So sometimes it has a broader idea than just what's in the Gospels, but the idea of the demonic takes off in the later New Testament writings and then in Revelation. Unclean spirits also very common in the Gospels. Remember, it was only used once in the Old Testament. It is used more often in the Gospels and seems to be a general synonym for demon. And as we saw a little earlier, right, even the unclean spirits see and they obey him. And in some cases, like a man was possessed with a demon and Jesus cast out the unclean spirit, and they're often just seem to be used interchangeably there. So, devil. Okay, so Satan in the New Testament becomes a bigger deal, as I said. Devil is merely an Anglicized word of the Greek diabolos, which means accuser. Again, another word that has a normal meaning. It's not a name, it's a title. It has a normal meaning outside of it. And it was often used by the Septuagint as the translation for Satan, adversary. That's where we get those connections from. Okay? And by the time of the Septuagint and New Testament, it starts to be seen as a particular spiritual being in charge of other evil spirits. Speaking of that, I didn't put this in here, but another little misconception on all this. Satan doesn't rule hell. I don't know if you've seen images of like Satan is the king of hell. Jesus mentions that hell was created for Satan and his angels. Jesus is the one that starts saying Satan is this particular being. Yeah, in the Old Testament, that's Jesus' language. But Jesus says hell was made for. Hell is a prison. Hell is a really big cosmic prison, all right? It's not a place. This isn't Paradise Lost, right? Lucifer falls and says, better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. He doesn't get to rule anywhere. Okay? Hell is a giant cosmic prison. So as I talked about, the New Testament is much more focused on Satan, devil, and demonic. That is a New Testament language. And kind of like the word hell. The word hell doesn't really appear in the Old Testament either. That was a King James problem. King James took 4 different words. I'll talk about more of this next week. But it took the words Sheol, Hades, Tartarus, and Gehenna, and it translated all of them with this Germanic word hell, which was a word used in Norse religion for the lower region you didn't want to go. It was the opposite of Valhalla, all right? But the Old Testament only talks about the land of the dead, Sheol. Hell does develop in Jewish ideas, because I've seen it in some of the medieval Kabbalistic writings, so they did have an idea of Gehenna somewhere. I'm not an expert in that, and I don't know when that development started. They could have gotten it from us, for all I know. I really don't know. That'd be a great thing to ask a rabbi or a Jewish scholar. However, when I compare the Old and the New Testament, the demonic and hell are Jesus' ideas. They are very strongly in the Gospels, more in the Old Testament. But as we see, then the devil tempts Jesus in the wilderness. The demonic is behind the opposition to the church, tempts Christians to sin, and then we have this phrase in Hebrews 2:14, Christ came to destroy the power of the devil. The devil becomes a very important part of that whole cosmology in the New Testament. Let's see. Serpent, I didn't even talk about this. It's only in the New Testament that calls the devil the ancient serpent, and only in Revelation. Genesis 3 does not say the serpent was Satan. It never at any point says that. That is a traditional interpretation, but it doesn't say that. And only in Revelation is the devil called the ancient serpent, and does not say it was connected to Genesis 3. We are kind of extrapolating those, but just so you know, it doesn't directly tie those together. It could just be that it's the idea of a dragon or a serpent that Revelation is pulling from, which was common in the Old Testament in the ancient Near East. You had in Babylonian religion, Tiamat, this multi-headed dragon of the salty waters that was slain by Marduk, and in the Enuma Elish, Marduk creates the world from basically her broken body. But in Leviathan and Job, it has a similar idea, this dragon from the sea. And in the Psalms, there's a Rahab that seems to be this sea monster that the psalm is saying God can slay even the sea monster. That's a whole other deal another time, but it could be Revelation is pulling from this imagery, and it's using this symbolism of dragons and giant dragons and serpents in the Old Testament to reference, Satan as being, an evil agent of chaos, essentially. So, it might just be a phrase for deceiver in there. It's really Christian tradition that will connect this with what's often called the proto-evangelion in Genesis 3:15, where God says the snake will strike your heel to Eve, and you will crush his head. And Christian interpreters, particularly early Christians, interpreted that as Mary giving birth to Jesus and crushing the head of Satan. It's a cruel image. I love it. But the Bible's not really clear that that's what's actually going on in those passages, honestly, at all. As much as I like the artwork that it spawns. Demonic in church history. So following Jesus, early Christians claimed a reputation for exorcism. Baptism developed a part of the exorcism in the church. A lot of early baptismal rites had exorcisms as part of it. The very first Book of Common Prayer, 1549, had an exorcism in baptism. They were dropped out after that, but we even had one in 1549. So it's a normal part. We still have the renunciation of Satan as part of it. So all of that was tied in with baptism in the early church. And then exorcist was part of an early minor order. So in the early church, you had major orders of deacon, priest, and bishop. And then you had lots of minor orders. And among things like a porter and a lector, a porter was like a door guard. A lector who read the scriptures, like a subdeacon. You also had an exorcist, and that was a normal part of the church structure. In fact, we have references in from the early church to Justin Martyr, who died in 165, fairly early, talks about numberless demoniacs throughout the whole world and in your city, many of our Christian men exorcising them in the name of Jesus Christ, crucified under Pontius Pilate, etc. Though they could not be cured by all the other exorcists and those who use incantations and drugs. So you see, Christians are doing things differently, right? We're not using all that other stuff, but we were known for being exorcists. That was the big thing. I also have this other quote from Justin Martyr, who talks about Jesus, helper and redeemer, the power whose name even the demons fear. And at this day, they are exorcised in the name of Jesus Christ, crucified by Pilate, kind of again. And so there again, we've had this language from the early church. And Tertullian, who died in 240, refers to the genii, those were Roman spirits, okay, as demons, and we are in the habit of exorcising them, not of swearing by them, and thereby conferring on them divine honor. So we cast those things out. Similar idea. Apostolic constitutions from the 4th century designates the order of exorcists, not ordained, but still an important part of the church structure. They were ordained exorcists, or they were unordained, but they were an official position. And the Council of Laodicea talks about those who have not been promoted to the office, i.e. of exorcist, should not exercise or adjure either in churches or in private houses. So we see that early Christians were doing a lot of this stuff. This was a normal part of being a Christian at the time. I made too much of this. We're just going to keep going. Is it okay if we keep going? Everybody good? Keep going? Okay, cool. Sorry. It took longer than I thought. I had a lot of information. I've got books to suggest. But anyway, so yes, both East and West developed exorcistic prayers, all right, and traditions, which later developed into medieval sorcery. Oops. So we'll talk about this when I talk about witchcraft, but here's what happened. You could do an exorcism right, and I got a lot of this. There's a great YouTube channel, Dr. Justin Sledge. He actually has a PhD in Western esotericism. And he has a lot of fascinating history on this channel. And basically what happened is that you had groups of clergy, because only clergy could read Latin. They were primarily the ones reading Latin, who had access to text on exorcism. Church was doing exorcism. And at some point, people said, well, if I can command a demon to leave a person, can I command them to do other things? And so sometimes it's referred to as the clerical necromantic underground. You had all these clergy running around doing sorcery based on exorcism and based on this tradition of the Testament of Solomon with all these different demons. So now you summon a demon that can do certain stuff, and you got different demons that do different things. And the thing about these early texts on sorcery, they are deeply Christian in that their language is Christian. They are commanding the demon in the name of Jesus. They're commanding it to do things in the name of Yahweh. Like, they're not pagans doing this. We'll talk about this in the witch trials, but the people doing actual witchcraft were not pagans. There were no pagans doing anything like that. There weren't even really any pagans at all in late medieval Europe. It's a whole other deal. We'll get to that. But these were Christians doing things they really shouldn't have been doing. So yes, unfortunately, that developed into sorcery, but it was very prominent. The exorcism was very prominent. Now, most of the focus in the medieval era was actually on saints' relics and shrines. So if you had issues with demonic, if you thought you were bewitched or cursed, you were just as more likely to go to a saint shrine and light a candle and pray to be delivered from the power of a saint, more than you would go to a cleric to have an exorcism done on. You might go to a cunning folk as well. We'll talk more about that on the third Sunday. But in most of the medieval era, the main emphasis was on saints, relics, and shrines. There were some in the exorcism texts, and then later, I want to say 1500s, 1600s, you really get a lot of exorcistic text and rituals until they're all kind of codified. I didn't bring it, but I have a reproduction of part of one late Renaissance exorcism text that has like all sorts of exorcisms of all sorts of things in it. It's a little wild. I should have called it, I guess. So yes, late medieval, early Renaissance sees the development of all sorts of exorcism books and etc. That starts seeing clergy as the ritual experts. And this is something where if you watch Dr. Justin Sledge's videos, and I'm not sure, he's a scholar, and this guy's a scholar here. This is a great book, The History of Exorcism and Catholic Christianity by Francis Young. And both of them, I'm still not sure, both of them feel like sometimes they're arguing two different things, and I really would love to see both of them talk to each other, because he argues this second part, that most of the medieval era was really about saints, relics, and shrines, not exorcism texts. Dr. Justin Sledge, from what I understand, watching his videos, argues that it was based on exorcism texts, so I'm not sure, but then some of those texts seem to be later, 1600s, and I think Francis Young, Dr. Francis Young is mostly dealing with like 11 to 1300, so it could just be a time period in development there. So that's kind of some of the history things. Origin theories, I'll just cover two. Obviously, as we have seen, the Bible doesn't say anything about the origin of demons or Satan at all. Like, nothing. Unless you want to interpret Isaiah and Ezekiel as being about Satan, then you have something. Otherwise, it says absolutely nothing. All right? Everything else is kind of speculation. However, the current popular view is obviously fallen angels. That's the one everybody has heard of. Okay? The reasons for this is because we have a few places. There's one. It is an early view. You have some places in like the book of Adam and Eve. Okay, it's in one of those non-canonical books that was written before the New Testament, where Satan is brought before Adam to reverence and honor and worship Adam as being God's image, and Satan refuses, and Michael submits, and Michael says, "Hey, who is like God?" That's what Michael means. That legend makes its way into the Quran, interestingly enough, but it also appears in the book of Adam and Eve. So it was an early view. We have places in the book of Daniel that seem to have these princes of Persia that are opposed to like the angel Gabriel, so it looks like there's some kind of, spiritual angel or something, but it doesn't say angel. However, this view is held by Thomas Aquinas. He believed the sin of angels was pride. They looked to themselves for the greatest good instead of to God, and that was what happened. It's basically, I do what I want, right? That was the ultimate, the cry of Satan is, I do what I want, right? That was a sin of pride. But a lot of times the Bible uses devil and his angels, and angels are said to be judged or sinning. So that's where this idea comes from. Basically, there are a few places in the Bible that say like Satan and his angels, or the devil and his angels, or there are places in the Old Testament that talk about angels can sin, or angels are being judged. Psalm 82 seems to be about these spiritual entities being judged. Okay, Job also has some of that in there as well. So we have some references to that, but remember the word angel just means messenger. So it's sort of a reference to an origin story, but maybe not. it's not entirely clear what the origin is. But this is the most popular view. It does seem to make the most sense. It is the common view held by such people as Thomas Aquinas. I don't want to argue with him too often, but he can't be wrong. Okay? So that does seem to be the primary one. However, it's not explicit. Demons are, in other words, the Bible never says demons are fallen angels. It never actually says it that explicitly. Angel can also be generic for messenger, and other traditions exist. In fact, 2 Peter 2:4 seems to imply that there are fallen angels, but they're all chained in Tartarus. And if they are, then what are these unclean spirits that Jesus encountered? Maybe not fallen angels, if 2 Peter 2:4 is good reference to all of them. Okay? So that's a curveball in that theory. They could be something else. There were plenty of early Christians who did not believe they were fallen angels, actually. Justin Martyr believed they were the souls of the Nephilim who died in the flood. He wasn't the only one at that time period that did. The Book of Enoch seems to imply that as well. There are fallen angels in the Book of Enoch. Samael and the other angels, the Watchers, who come down and teach humanity evil stuff. The Book of Enoch describes evil things as like magic, witchcraft, making of weapons, and makeup. Yes, makeup is listed among the evil things that these fallen angels teach. But they seem to be judged. In the Book of Enoch, they're taken down to Gehenna. They're chained. They're done. So some people believe the demons were the Nephilim. In fact, Justin Martyr argues that's why demons want to possess people. Because they used to have physical bodies, and they want that sensation again. They want to enjoy pleasure, so they possess people so they can do it. That was what he said. And so there are, and demon can just mean a lesser spirit. And can, in fact, just mean a shade of the dead. There's one book I didn't bring where there's an article in it. This is an academic book that argues that in the New Testament context, a daemonion basically meant more of a ghost than it did a fallen angel. So this is a minority report on that. It could be that they're not fallen angels. It could be that they are something else. And starting to get into the nitty gritty, that was like the information dump. What I tell people is that the demonic mostly acts by fear, temptation, and deception. At the end of the day, when we start talking about these things, so in Texas, I was a consultant for a paranormal research group, the Texas Paranormal Research Team. There was a lady that I got to know through that, and she started attending our church. And the reason I got involved in this was I told her, I said, hey, if you've got anything you encounter, how about I act as a consultant, right? How about I help you there? I mean, it's either me or somebody's going to do it. So I think it's better for everyone, in my opinion, if, a Christian priest with hopefully a pretty good head on his shoulders, hopefully, can be involved in the consulting for that kind of thing. I never did an exorcism in person. I did some exorcism in houses. Nothing happened when I was there. I was disappointed. I actually wanted to walk into a house and have magnets fly out the fridge and hit me. I thought that would be fascinating. It was boring. Nothing happened. Mostly what I did was I went to houses. These were, in one case, the couple were retired Navy criminal investigators. They were wealthy. They didn't want any attention, but they said strange stuff was happening in their house. They described some of it. I did a house blessing, and we called them back, and they said it was stopped. It was done. Most of the time what happened is I went to a house. Nothing happened when I was there. I would talk to the person, talk to them, hey, look, the main deal, this is my spiel I did. The main way the demonic works is by fear, temptation, and deception. The demonic in the world wants to make you afraid of everything, right? And this is irrational fear. This is not, being afraid of, heavy traffic, right? You should look both ways before you cross the street. You should wear a mask during the pandemic, right? Okay? But there are some good fears, all right? This is irrational fear. This is just fear of like everything. Everything in the world is bad and dangerous and out to get me. That leads you to be tempted, right? You can very much easily be tempted into sin, tempted into being destructive. That's what we renounce in our baptism. The evil powers of this world that destroy and corrupt the creatures of God. It tempts you into being destructive. It tempts you into harming people, right? And that's the other thing about the flesh, by the way. The Bible, like when Paul says, resist the sins of the flesh, he follows it up with things like envy and greed. Okay? He's not talking about sexual sins when he talks about the flesh. This is all the stuff we ignore. Okay? This is envy, greed, hatred for people that are different than us, hatred for creation, lack of care about creation. That's the demonic stuff. And that's the temptation and the deception part of things, right? Racism is a temptation to deception about a fear of other people. And that's where the demonic operates, all right? I get on this is really what it's mainly about. Other stuff is like parlor tricks. Okay, I'm not if you walk into your house, if you ever have in your house something weird does happen, if a magnet does fly off at you, give me a call. I'll go over there. But just know that's a parlor trick. It doesn't matter. The main thing is really Christian spiritual warfare is resisting pride and greed and serving the forces of death that harm God's images of creation. When we practice hope and faith and love, when we live in humility and prayer, that's actually spiritual warfare. That's the bread and butter of spiritual warfare. The just basic Christian living. That's fighting Satan and the demons. Don't worry about the extra fancy stuff. Unless it happens, then give me a call. But usually flashy isn't the main thing. Usually it's just this. Okay? But sometimes, yes, deliverance is needed. And we do have official exorcists in the church. One of the things I want to show off, this is hard to find. I'll let you look at it. This is the Exeter. This is a hard copy of something called the Exeter Report. It was produced by the Bishop of Exeter in the Church of England when he had priests going around doing all sorts of exorcisms, and there was no regulation on it. And he had a report issued on it. And this started the modern ministry of deliverance in the Church of England. And so this has a lot of information and some exorcisms in it. And in the Episcopal Church, we have our Book of Vocational Services, which, yes, has a section on concerning exorcism. It says anything related to the rites to be used or how it be done should be addressed to the bishop. And some dioceses do have diocesan exorcists. Again, I met a guy who used to be the one for this diocese. I knew the guy who was the one in Dallas, and I have talked to one of them that is in the diocese of, I believe he's in Virginia. So this does still happen. Bishops still do this. And then in our book, in our house blessing, the celebration for a home, I will turn to this here. Home 146. Yep, 146. Has what we might call a minor exorcism. Often in this ministry, a major exorcism is the term used for exorcisms of people, basically what we see Jesus doing. And a minor exorcism is sometimes one of a house, or sometimes it's more passive, oh Lord, deliver, this from all evil, as opposed to I command you in the name of Jesus. So sometimes these distinctions are made between major and minor. But in this celebration for a home, the priests will say, let the mighty power of the holy God be present in this place to banish from it every unclean spirit. We have an exorcism in our Book of Occasional Services in the Episcopal Church. Yes, Episcopalians do exorcism. To cleanse it from every residue of evil and to make it a secure habitation for those who dwell in it. In the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. That is an exorcism. There's nothing else. There's nothing else you would call that. All right. So yes, the Episcopal Church absolutely does do exorcisms, and we have exorcists. I know the Roman Catholic Church is mostly known for it, but we do it too. So people should come to us. Just saying. I'm just trying to cut into their. I'm trying to cut into their business a little. All right. So yes, it also has a purification of profane objects, which is really interesting. If an object has been defiled by human malice or craft of Satan, it says in here, it asks for God to purify that object. So I have used that a couple of times. So here we go. And I've sometimes, if churches have been desecrated, the bishop will come in and use that and purify a church that's been desecrated. So concluding thoughts. I do think a project of demythalization. This is the idea that all the Bible talks about on this are really myths, and we just need to get to the real story behind the text. I think it's doomed to fail. This is another little soapbox I have. I think sometimes the argument is made that Christianity needs to sort of become less supernatural to appeal to people. My argument against that is, have you seen all the metaphysical neo-pagan shops in the area?
Yeah.
This is big business. People are buying this somewhere. Some of them are really good. I buy my incense from several of them. Really nice folk, actually. In Dallas, I got to know one of the owners of one of the metaphysical shops. It was really interesting. One of them came to me because she believed she had been cursed by another business partner who was also into this, and she would remove it herself, but Mars was in retrograde, so her stuff didn't work. So she asked me, like, can you help me? And like, so here's the thing, y'all. This is what one of the professors in the seminary said. When people come to the church with a spiritual problem and say, hey, can you help? And we said, well, we don't do that kind of thing anymore. We basically told them Jesus can't help you, go somewhere else, right? So of course they're going to go down and find, a spirit worker, a Reiki specialist of some sort, that'll do it for them, right? But why not say, yeah, I can help you? And what I actually did was I found an old prayer from the Byzantine Empire for the removal of the evil eye. And I modified it for the removal of curses. And it's like, you know what, the Bible talks about this, I'm just going to go with it and see what happens, right? And so I prayed over her, and she was fine. Everything was great after that. So I guess it worked, right? But I got to know the people. They're wonderful people. Neo-pagans can be very, very nice, wonderful, moral people. Don't be afraid of them. They're not demon worshipers or Satan worshipers. We'll talk about that in the third series. I do think that we have some very big differences in our religious beliefs. Christianity and paganism have some real areas of disagreement and conflict. But there's no reason to hate them or be afraid of them either. Okay? But I also think that it's not going to work, right? People are not fleeing Christianity for something less supernatural, right? They're looking to candles and crystals and incense and magic, and they're not leaving it for that. They're leaving it because we've been hypocrites. We've been bad, okay? When we come up with other reasons, I think we're just excusing our own sins. Well, we've really been good people. They're just, we just haven't been enlightened enough for them. No, we've just been really bad. All right, we've been sinners. That's what we've been. That's why they're leaving. So let's be honest about it. I don't think that demythalization will save the church. People are not leaving because we're too weird. Okay, it's okay to embrace the spiritual and the weird. Spiritual powers are real, but they're not all good. I think regardless of that, throughout the New Testament at least, we see that distinction there. And this gets to my other thing. This is where I think belief in demons actually helps us as Christians in a small way, because it prevents us from becoming Gnostic, right? So Gnosticism is a big, broad topic. There are lots of different types of Gnostics who believed in lots of different things. I realize it was a very diverse religious tradition, but one of those core things that bound them together is that in some way, shape, or form, the physical world is bad. Our bodies are bad, and spirit is good, and salvation is an escape from the material, an escape from the physical body. Okay, that was at its core. Well, the thing about a belief in demons does is it checks that, because demons, whether they are fallen angels or not, are spirits, and that means something that is pure spirit can still be evil. Which means we can't just say, well, the problem is my body, my spirit is good. Spirit might be bad too. Pure spiritual creatures can still sin. Because this is my not talking about demons soapbox for why I think the Episcopal Church is so awesome deal. This is something you all should tell your friends. I think that almost all of our theology, almost all of it, goes back to this one core question. What is the relationship between nature and grace? What is the relationship between the creation, our physical bodies, our knowledge of science in the world? What is the relationship between all of this material stuff in this world we live in, and on one hand, and God's power and grace on the other? And if you believe they're in conflict, then, well, sacraments don't make a lot of sense. Why would baptism save anyone? Why would Christ become present in bread and wine? Why would we bless palms or bless ashes on Ash Wednesday? Why would we make ritual actions like the sign of the cross or genuflect? Why would we have sacred time? Why would we have sacred space? None of it would make any sense. If nature and grace are in conflict with each other, predestination makes the most sense. God's will overrides our nature. Revelation is opposed to reason. Maybe you even start talking about salvation as an escape from the physical body. right? We just need to get rid of this body and become this pure spirits God wanted us to be. That's just like Gnosticism. But it starts to lead towards that. But if grace perfects nature and doesn't destroy it, as St. Thomas Aquinas said, then of course God is going to resurrect these bodies, because God is in the creation-saving business. God loves the birds and the trees and the mountains and everything. Of course God works with our will. We call that synergism instead of monergism. Predestination doesn't make any sense anymore. Of course God works through the sacraments. Of course God can be worshipped in my physical bodies by ritual actions. And don't think we're the only ones that do it. I was at Dallas Seminary. They have their own ritual actions too. They were just like this, right? This is a ritual action, okay? Because I bet you, when everyone else is doing this, you got to do it too, okay? It's a ritual action. Of course God can be worshipped with our physical bodies, and the way we do things matters, and physical stuff matters, because grace perfects nature, it doesn't destroy it. And what's one of the things that keeps us on that theology? The idea that even pure spirits can be evil. So in some ways, demonology helps keep us out of Gnosticism, I think. Kind of an interesting way of thinking about things. At the end, of course, Satan was defeated by Jesus on the cross, and daily Christian life with prayer, work, and study, pursuing faith, hope, and love is our primary weapon, if you will, against spiritual evil. But when things get out of hand, yes, we do deliverance ministry and exorcism, often in places and that sort of thing. So, that's on demons. I'm going to show you a few books here and one other thing. Next week we'll talk about ghosts. This is a medal of St. Benedict. You're welcome to look at it. You may have seen some of these. Episcopalians sometimes use these. Episcopal exorcists sometimes use them because they actually have an exorcism on them. It's an acronym for Latin. Vade retro Santana nunc consuehi vana, sutumala quaelibus ipse venida vivus. Be gone, Satan, what you offer me is poison, drink it yourself, basically is what it says. It's really great. And so that's kind of the ground there. Marissa can correct my pronunciation later. Okay, all right, good. So yeah, take a look at that. That's kind of an interesting thing. I have a book of occasional services here. If you're interested in spending a lot of money and you're interested in the academics of all this, the Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible has a copious amount of information, including references to like similar ancient Near Eastern concepts. It's also very expensive, but if you're interested in that, we've got this. This is actually, I don't have the fourth one of this series. This is all Jeffrey Burton Russell's sort of on the history of evil. He's got one on evil in the ancient world, one in Christianity, one in the Middle Ages. He's got another one in the modern world. I don't have it. The most demonic thing about this series is that the third one is a different color, and it bothers me a lot. I'm a bit of a book geek, and they're not all the same. So that's kind of evil. But an accessible book for you might be this, Powers of Evil by Sidney Page. I don't agree with everything, but it's a really good overview. People of the Lie was written by a psychiatrist, and some of his encounters with people that he said there was something going on more than just psychiatric. Like there was something else, and he couldn't put his finger on it until he started to think of the idea of demonic. It was the only way some of it made any sense. So this is kind of an interesting thing too. This one, Deliverance, is written by someone who does deliverance and exorcism ministry in the Church of England. I already talked about the Exeter report. This guy who has an unfortunate last name, Francis McNutt, but he was an Episcopal priest who did a lot of this kind of ministry. He has, again, I don't agree with everything. I think sometimes he goes a little too far. He gets a little bit fringy in a couple of places, maybe. Let's see. This one's really good. Graham 12 Trees in the Name of Jesus. This is probably also accessible. It's not too scholarly. It's kind of a history of what Jesus' exorcisms look like in the Gospels. And then I have these 3 history books. One on the history of exorcism in basically the early and medieval church. One, a history of Anglican exorcism, what it's been like in the Church of England, written by the same guy, so 2 volumes in the same one. And then Demon Possession in Elizabethan England, so it kind of continues that historical trend. And then these 2, there's a guy, Walter Wink, who is into demythalization. He doesn't believe demons are any real entities. They're just words for concepts. And I don't agree with him on that, but he does make some really good points about other ideas in the New Testament.
where evil seems to be more concepts of powers. Like, I know I mentioned this when I talk about, we talk about the world, the flesh, and the devil. When I talk about the world, like, it's like a toxic work environment, right? And everybody in it seems good, but somehow the whole is worse than the sum of the parts, right? Or in a family situation where everybody seems okay, but somehow this whole dynamic is bad. The New Testament does use language to describe systemic evil. That's what we would call it, systemic evil. And so I don't fully agree with him on everything, but this is really good series, the third one too, where he goes into some of those New Testament ideas. So I think if you're interested in any of this stuff, it's still really definitely worth reading. And I think in some of the cases he's really on point to it. So just kind of wanted to highlight that. And that's it. So yeah, sorry, that took an hour and a half instead. But any questions? Ready to drive me out of the church as being a little too weird?
No.
No? Okay, just checking. All right, great. Well, thank you all very much. Feel free to come look at these books. And yeah, if you think of any other questions, let me know. And next week, we'll talk about ghosts. Are there not? And I might bring my little PK here. All right? Let's see here. Oh, that's on the. How do I? How do I? Oh, here it is.